George, we know about Curt and his connection with Bobby Heenan. I mean, people see it in the, WWF at the time. I mean, it's really kind of where a lot of people kind of really figured out that genuine. It seemed like there was a genuine chemistry between the two. But what was the relationship like before WWE? Was there a strong connection between the two of them in the AWA?
It's rather interesting because that's what I was going to allude to earlier. We had a taste of Bobby Heenan going to manage Curt Hennig and, go after Curt Hennig. And Larry got into it with Harley Race. The actual match took place where Harley had come in. I got to get this right now. Harley had come into the AWA and Bobby was going to be his manager. And he had a match against Curt Hennig.
There you go.
And what happened on TV was Bobby got involved and Harley was really kicking the crap out of Larry's kid. And then Larry came into the ring and we were excited. I know I was. We were going to see the greatest AWA tag team of all time, Hennig and Race, go at each other. And Larry came out afterwards and delivered one of the greatest promos when he was blasting Harley Race for coming after his kid. And I'm going to take care of you, Harley Race, and we're going to end this and blah, blah, blah. Well, what happened was that behind the scenes, Vern and Harley weren't agreeing on what Harley was going to get paid. It came down to that. And Harley departed abruptly. The whole thing was over. And so then it was kind of interesting when Bobby and Curt ended up in the WWF and Bobby was Curt's manager. Mm-hmm. And kind of came full circle because Bobby had actually briefly managed both Hennig and Race previously in the AWA. But that was a feud that I wanted to see, and it would have went over well. Mm-hmm. I mean, if anything would have went over well, it would have been a Hennig versus Race feud. You could have had Curt and Bobby involved in it, whatever you wanted. It would have been great.
Did you ever get the sense, George, that those guys wanted to have that feud, leading up to it, or was this one that, I mean, how did that come about? Like the potential teasing of that, was there a specific?
Well, the key thing to remember is that Curt was still a babyface.
Yes.
And here comes Bobby Heenan, who's going to manage Harley Race, who had come back to the AWA. And of course, he was renowned as being a former NWA champion and, obviously a former AWA tag team champion. But when he's plummeting, Curt Hennig on TV and Bobby Heenan gets involved, there was nothing, as far as Curt being the babyface, there was nothing Larry Hennig could do but to come to save his boy. And that's where it happened. Larry, I think, played the part of, I don't know what's wrong with Harley Race, what got into him, but he's not going to beat up on my son. That's what his interview was stating. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be beating up on my kids. So Harley Race, you got the axe. And we had it. But like I say, behind the scenes, it was working out. This was the program they were going to present to us. And Harley legitimately had a beef with Vern about what was promised. And you got to remember, we're looking at around 85, 86, whatever the time period was here, and things were falling apart. So Harley left abruptly, and it was never mentioned again.
Mick, tell me about the Robbinsdale bar brawl story.
This is a story that I got directly from Curt. So of course, you take it with a grain of salt, but then I had it verified by some people that were actually there. Curt, born and raised in Robbinsdale, Minnesota, as were so many of the guys, Rick Rude, Barry Darso, you name it. But, Curt was a kind of a regular at some of the local bars and clubs in the Robbinsdale area. So Curt's telling me this story one time where I don't know if I believe Curt was playing pool, and there was some guy about 6'5", 6'6", 300 pounds. I mean, this guy, to hear Curt describe it, the guy was a monster. And the guy is also in his cups. and he sees Curt Hennig playing pool, and he's, he wants to be a tough guy. He wants to go after a wrestler. So Curt's kind of minding his own business as this guy's needling Curt, needling. Well, finally, Curt's had about enough of it, and they start a little push and shove. And people are kind of scattering in the bar a little bit, and Curt suddenly realizes that even though this guy is in an inebriated state, this is a pretty tough guy. I don't know if he had any athletic background or what, but he was getting the best of Curt. And apparently Curt fell down like between a wall and a pool table. So you got to envision that. And this Goliath is on top of him, pounding. And Curt says to the guy, all right, enough. If you don't let me up, I am going to beat the shit out of you. All right. Well, for some reason, that resonated with the guy. He got up. He got off of Curt. Curt, now freed up, proceeded to beat the shit out of the guy. So, who knows? Had Curt not used a little bit of a psychology there, or had the guy not been, 3 sheets to the wind and stayed on top of Curt, Curt may still be there. He may still be underneath the table in Robbinsdale.
That's incredible. Did you hear a lot of those stories about things like that happening with Curt? A lot in terms of people wanting to challenge him because of the Hennig name, or is that something that was common back then, Mick?
We've talked about stuff like this before. That was typical wrestlers, typical wrestling fans when they had a couple too many. They saw a wrestler in a bar, they wanted a piece of him. They wanted to be the tough guy. Unfortunately, in 99% of the cases, I'm sure it didn't work out so well. Mm-hmm. Curt, I think, was probably one of the only guys that had to use psychology, to extricate himself from that. But it was commonplace. Everybody had that liquid courage back in the day. And again, Curt was one of these guys, never forgot his roots. He would always see him at the local haunts, the independent wrestling shows. He was always there. So he was kind of a regular. He was a mainstay. And just one of those things. Liquid courage.
I know we're going to get into the Mr. Perfect era, and I definitely want to get your guys' takes on that in terms of the transformation and how that was presented and everything. But you mentioned, Mick, staying true to who he was and going to these indie events. Was he even, after he was a well-known name, was he a regular at the indie shows? Could he even go to a show and not get hounded by fans?
He really could. It was kind of a narrow scope, though. He would go to shows that were held like maybe at the main event bar or, something of that type. The local haunts kind of in the northwest suburbs, the northeast suburbs, out in Fridley and what have you. But to the point about whether or not he forgot his roots, never. Curt was always one of the boys and always had that connection with the Minnesota guys. I mentioned Dan Jesser as an example. Brad Rangens, even Brock Lesnar, Curt's famous story about taking down Brock Lesnar at 30,000 feet or whatever. Curt maintained that loyalty even after he became the Mr. Perfect superstar. He was one of those guys, never forgot where he came from, always maintained the friendships.
Well, let's get into the Mr. Perfect persona, guys. And I know the Mr. Perfect thing, it's particularly important to us here because a lot of the videos, to my understanding, were shot here in the Twin Cities. I know that, I believe, one of the Timberwolves training facilities and out at the old Eden Prairie, Winter Park, where the Vikings were at. But just in terms of the way that they built up the transition from, cool Curt Hennig and the heel to Mr. Perfect, George, give me your thoughts on that and just the lead up in the videos leading into that persona.
Back when that was taking place, Chris and Mick, I was watching the WWF religiously at that point. Still on board with them and looking at the creation of all their different characters and wrestlers that were coming in. And I was really enamored with the little vignettes that they started doing. They brought Curt in by showing that he was the perfect golfer, that he was the perfect bowler. I mean, they'd have him doing the hole-in-one. They'd have him doing a perfect bowling game. Mm-hmm. They had him doing bow and arrow and hitting the target, several times in a row. And playing basketball. I remember there was one where he was going around the basketball court and one hoop right after the other. I mean, it's like he was a one-man team. And they had him playing baseball or softball. And the same thing, he was hitting the ball out of the park, no matter how many times the pitcher hit it to him. And they did this for a while to build up Mr. Perfect. They weren't really saying he was Curt Hennig. It was Mr. Perfect. Because, and then Curt would come on with that smug look, because I'm perfect. And I remember thinking at the time that of all of the different characters, I mean, look at the smug look there. That's about the way it was. But Curt would be doing all these things. And when I think about what Vince McMahon was doing at the time with so many characters, I remember thinking like what he did with Rick Martel as the model. I thought that was such a disaster. Or Steve Kern as Skinner, some alligator guy, and then they had Steve Austin as the ringmaster originally, and it bombed. And could we forget Doink the Clown and stuff like this? But I thought, boy, when they come out with this Mr. Perfect, and Curt was the absolute right person. That's that old story. You're in the right place at the right time, the right guy. It's like Ted DiBiase when he got dubbed the $1 Million Man. They say other people were thought about for the part, but I don't think anybody else could have played it. Yeah. Mr. Perfect played it, Mr. Perfect, well.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up with you on that, George. Do you feel like when he's in the AWA and then, signs to WWF, that Vince could look at him and say, this is the perfect wrestler, this is the perfect everything? I mean, would you get this? I mean, this is just strictly your opinion. Do you feel like it was a gimmick that was made for Curt, or do you just feel like maybe the gimmick was there and Curt just happened to slide right into it perfectly? No pun intended. I just realized that. I
actually think that it was a gimmick created for Curt. I've never heard that Vince had ever considered anyone else. Whereas $1 Million Man, we know there were talk of a couple of other guys, and DiBiase got it. With Curt, I think it was created for him, and I don't think there was anybody else that could have pulled it off as well as he did. I also, despite the fact that Curt probably had some injury issues, I was really of the belief at the time that perhaps they were going to push Curt a lot farther up the ladder. He got the Intercontinental title twice from the Texas Tornado. Kerry Von Erich.
Wow, you're not a Kerry Von Erich fan?
No, well, no. Kerry Von Erich, which they never referred to as Kerry Von Erich, but he got it from him a couple of times. And Curt he just fit it. I think if he wouldn't have been hurt, we don't know. He had great matches against Hogan. Whether or not at that point in time he would have been the guy to take Hogan and become the WWF, I don't know. But I really think the plans were big for him.
What do you remember at that?
Yeah, I as far as the injuries were concerned, Curt had a terrible series of back injuries, and he had to take a lot of time off. I know he had a Lloyd's of London policy.
Yes.
That pretty much, he got some steady income, but it kind of prevented him from being in the ring for a while. But I would have to say, to your point, Chris, about whether or not the role was created for him or whether or not he slid into it or whatever, I don't think it makes any difference in the sense that nobody could have done it better. And I think it speaks to not only his initial heel days in the AWA, because that's when he started to formulate this cocky attitude, but I don't remember anybody seriously in the business that made such a complete transformation from what he was when he started. The baby face with, kind of a blah personality into this, there it is. I mean, that was Mr. Perfect. And he did it so well. George talked about all the vignettes with Steve Jordan of the Minnesota Vikings. And Curt was great friends with Wade Boggs when they did those baseball vignettes. So Curt was kind of a schmoozer in the athletic circles anyway. So I think he was having so much fun with it. And it goes back to what I said early on. He embraced this character, this Mr. Perfect, and he fine-tuned it and he tweaked it. And I don't think there was anybody better in the 1980s, late 80s, early 90s in the business than Curt Hennig. I just don't. I think he had everything. He bumped his ass off for everybody. If you watch some of his matches, well, no wonder this guy's got back issues. I mean, he was selling and bumping like a yo-yo all over the ring. And, again, it's part of the legacy. What a body of work this guy left.
I'd point out too, Chris, that when you look at the talent that Curt was able to go against, with Bret Hart and with Ric Flair, obviously were considered to be the best in the business at the time. And I think Curt was above both of them. I really do. I think at the point of his Mr. Perfect persona, he was the best, honestly, the best wrestler, if you want to call wrestler. Mm-hmm. And, if there was one guy, and this is fantasy now, that if we'd have went back 10, 15 years, and if there would have been a guy that could have pulled off the Mr. Perfect persona, I think it would have been Nick Bockwinkel. He could have pulled that off if it had been that time frame. But obviously Nick was way out of the scene at that point. Curt was perfect. That's all you can say.
Was he? You guys saw him at the beginning of his run when he was just the white meat baby face who everybody loved because his dad was extremely well known and successful. We're going to get into probably the toughest part of the entire conversation coming up. But to me, he made a very fantastic heel. But do you guys feel like he was better as the villain or, better as the good guy? Which one of those fit him in terms of his personality, his attitude, and how he was able to do it? Which way, George, do you feel like he really did it better?
Absolutely a heel. He nailed it. And it almost seemed like it was the real Curt. He just had the personality. He had the arrogance. He had the look. He had the strut, the cockiness. And he didn't have to do it. I mean, when he'd throw his towel up and spit his gum out and catch it, the guy just, he made you want to hate him. He was perfect as a heel.
I agree 100%. I think that's an absolute no-brainer, Chris. I mean, even when he was teaming up with Scott Hall, Curt was the worker of the two. Yeah, he could get in the ring and he could bump, but Scott Hall had that presence about him. So Curt was kind of overshadowed, I think, in a lot of respects by Scott Hall. But man, like George said, everything about that Mr. Perfect persona, and there's Curt and Scott again, everything about the Mr. Perfect persona, he fine-tuned with a fine-tooth comb, and he put an edge to it, and he delivered. George mentioned, Nick as a possibility. I'm not even sure that Nick 20 years earlier could have carried it. Curt just evolved in the role of Mr. Perfect, and Larry would say he's the best in the world, in my estimation. Yeah. He was right. He was. At the time, I'm telling you again, Curt Hennig was it. He was the gold standard in wrestling.
The funny thing about the whole Mr. Perfect thing, guys, is I remember when I saw the gimmick. I'm a kid, and I'm thinking to myself, when he gets beat, is he no longer going to be Mr. Perfect? St. Paul Civic Center, he and Hulk Hogan main evented, and Hogan beat him. And I'm like, well, guess what? He's not going to be Mr. Perfect anymore. Then the next Monday, or on like primetime wrestling before Monday Night Raw, I'm like, wait a minute, Hulk Hogan beat Mr. Perfect. He can't be perfect anymore. And I think that was part of it for me that I just, that's when I really kind of got it. And I'm like, okay, he doesn't have to have the unblemished record to be perfect. And I think that's when everything kind of came together for me.
Well, first of all, I think it's a typical heel. No matter what, all the braggadocio, I'm perfect. I've got an unbeaten record. there's always an excuse. There's always some reason, whether it's a hometown referee or a fast count by the, whatever, or the timekeeper is off. The heel always had an excuse. So I think Curt's greatest line, of course, was when they would ask him, "Are you a good guy or a bad guy?" And Curt would say, "I'm a great guy."
Yes.
That really said it all.
Yeah.
And the whole spitting of the gum.
Oh,
I've tried that. It's not as easy as he made it look.
No.
I mean, you're like, and then I'd like pick it off the floor and I'd try and like do it again. I'd do it like 3-4 times until I got it. But yes,
spit it out and bat it like a
spit it
like
out
a
and bat it
mosquito.
like you're a cat. Yeah, you're a cat playing with a piece of yarn or something.
what would happen? Did you have your cat at the time? What happens if the cat picks up the gum that you misfired on and choked on it?
Oh, this was before I had the cat.
Oh, all right. I got a little concerned.
I mean, I didn't slap the cat. I slapped the gum before
you didn't
I had
throw the cat up in the air and then
I didn't throw the cat up in the air and slap the cat.
Okay, I got it.
As we're getting ready to wrap it up here, guys. Unfortunately, back February 10th, 2003, 44 years old. I think just weeks away from turning 45, we lost Curt, and I think it was a shock to everybody. But I mean, did you ever get the sense? And I know he'd been on the road with WWE for a significant amount of time, so maybe you guys really didn't have the daily contact with him that you once had. But when you hear about Curt's passing, I mean, what are you thinking? Why don't you just go ahead and start here, George?
When I got the news, I think I took it very hard again because I was so close to Larry over the years, and obviously being AWA related. And I remember being very devastated about it. And the age 44 thing really hit home. The sad thing is that around that same time, as much as I hate to say this, we had started to, or I at least had started to get a regular diet of some of these guys passing at a young age.
It seemed like there was a lot in that period of time. It seemed like there was a lot in that couple years.
Between the very late 90s and the first half of 2000s, it was a regular occurrence where one of the younger modern day stars were found dead in their hotel room or whatever the case was. And it really hurt me with Curt because I remember how Larry took it. And Larry was in denial. I hate to say that. He was in denial. But it happened. And it was, between the steroids and the other substances that were being ingested during that time frame by so many of the boys, it just seemed inevitable that we were going to get another one and another one and another one, and we did. I mean, it just literally there were a dozen of them, very short period of time. Curt's took me the toughest though because he was local hero, and I still don't believe it. I mean, now he'd be 60 some years old and he should be with us and telling stories.
Curt about Curt, back in the day, as you alluded to, it was an epidemic back then, between the steroids and what was happening to the guys' hearts, excuse me, and some of the other substances that you mentioned, George, that they ingested. So many of those guys in their 30s and 40s that had no business passing away. I mean, let's be honest about it. And, that's a whole other show as far as who do you blame? Do you blame the business? Do you blame life on the road? Do you blame the night after night, the uppers, the downers, the lifestyle, the partying, whatever? You can talk about it all you want, but it's a tragedy. And unfortunately, it cast a really bad light on wrestling, which had problems of its own back then and always has had problems of its own. But the spotlight was on wrestling, and not in a good way. As far as Curt passing away, blew me away, just like you, George. I mean, it's like, oh my God, not Curt. You figure, well, all these other guys are either smart enough or they were, I don't know, but just didn't believe that it could happen to Curt Hennig. And again, I think Larry was in denial, just like George said, and kind of looking past the foibles of what the business could provide for you on the road. And, in that sense, that I guess is the one area, and I pardon the pun, that Curt was not perfect. He fell into the lifestyle and the partying, and ultimately we all lost out when we lost Curt.
The thing I would say about the lifestyles and the businesses that had changed so abruptly during the 90s going forward, the substance abuse, the partying, these guys were on the road still, so many nights a week, a month, away from their families. They were under a lot of stress, and I will forever believe that the business changed in the sense that every wrestler in the era that McMahon was promoting back then, every wrestler had to be 6'7", 350 pounds, and built like the proverbial brick shithouse. And that was the look that was being challenged to these guys, whether it was directly told to them to do or whether it was they felt they had to do it to get a push. And that's the way the business had changed. You look at Mr. Perfect and you look at Curt Hennig, 2, 3, 4, 5 years before that, you got two different body styles. Curt had built himself up. And whether it was real or whether it wasn't, that along with the drugs and the things that took place, it was a bad scene. And it was sad, very, very sad that so many fell into it. As Mick said, none of them intended to die. None of them were looking to die. They were all looking to just be the best they could and enjoy a little recreation when they got out of their matches to unwind. And unfortunately, it didn't turn out that way.
You got to remember, Chris, this is 1990s, like George was saying, and it wasn't just wrestling. I mean, we're a wrestling podcast, but there was stuff going on in all different kinds of professional sports, and it was kind of an entitlement. And when you're on the road constantly and you got things being not handed to you, thrown at you, literally.
Well, it's the same thing with rock bands and musicians and things like that.
Yeah, a perfect example there. I appreciate that. But again, there was something kind of mind-boggling about Curt. Maybe it was our connection with him or the connection with Larry, but there was a certain numbness and just not believing this when we got the news that Curt was gone.
Well, and I mean, the thing is, if Curt would have passed away when he was 65 or 70 or something like that, or 80, normal like the wrestlers, it's sad. We're hurt about it, but you expect it. But when you're 44, and some of the guys around him that were, even younger than 44, and some of them a little bit older, we're all hearing about their hearts exploding and different things. I mean, it was a tough time. It was a rough time for the business. And then as Mick pointed out, the other sports as well. I mean, nothing was sacred. Look at baseball. They had the whole steroid scandal thing. And it was a bad time. Nick Bockwinkel used to tell me, he says, in my era, we wrestled, we got a loaf of bread and some beer, went back to the hotel and made a bologna sandwich and drank beer, got up the next morning, went to the next town, did the same thing. He says, now they're doing it different.
So the eulogy and Larry at the service. Mick, tell me, kind of give me your synopsis of just the difficult time that Larry had, especially at that service and giving the eulogy.
The whole thing not only was horribly sad, Chris, it was surreal. Larry delivered the eulogy, and there were actually some handouts with the printed eulogy. I love that shot of Larry kind of supervising Curt's training back in the day at the gymnasium. But Larry was up there, and they're playing Curt's theme song, before all this starts, the Mr. Perfect theme. And Larry broke down, and it was so incredibly sad. Some of the guys were there. I remember seeing Brian Knobs and Shawn Michaels and, whoever else was there at the time. And I think Vince and Stephanie and Shane actually came in real briefly to pay tribute and then left. But Larry got out there, and everybody kind of can identify with this. He said, no father should ever have to eulogize his son.
Right.
And so unnecessary, but it was so emotional for everybody in the building to hear Larry talking about all of Curt's accolades. And yet there was some bitterness. There was some bitterness because Larry felt that even though Curt had attained this great level of success, Larry, for some reason, still was making reference to the fact, and he did this at the funeral, to the fact that some of the promoters did not treat Curt as well as they should have. Larry basically was saying that, Curt was a stellar talent. The fans recognized it. The fellow wrestlers recognized it. But he said only 50% of the promoters recognized it and treated Curt fairly. Mm-hmm. So I never got a chance to really talk with Larry about that at length. I don't know who he was referring to. I know a lot of times he talked about the WWE or WWF Ferris wheel, how it made a stop and you got off and somebody else got on and you were kind of expendable. Love that picture too. Talk about, the father-son relationship. There's Larry and a very young Curt Hennig, at the park playing ball. It was an emotional situation, and I felt very, very badly for Larry Hennig. And what can you say?
George, obviously, we're talking about the memorial, but it can't be easy, I'm sure, for something like this to happen. And you mentioned the relationship and just how close they were. And you were devastated, and he was, Larry kind of ended up being kind of a recluse after that. Did you ever get a chance to talk to Larry much about it after, Curt had passed?
Back in 2012, so 10 years ago, that was the visit that I had talked about where I was at Larry's house. We sat for, I tell you, the whole afternoon. And Larry opened up quite a bit. But everything he said, I could tell that he was bitter at how the business had changed from what he had been in himself.
And that's another great picture I love right there, George.
I love that picture. I love
the whole Hennig family.
And very, very appropriate. And Hennig and or Larry with Irene and the kids. But Larry was. I don't know that I would say he was bitter. He seemed like he was confused when he was trying to relay the story, that he didn't understand how his business was allowed to change the way it did, and it took his boy. Yeah. Was almost the way he put it. And like I say, I don't think Larry ever really wanted to acknowledge to himself, or was able to, exactly, how it happened. I mean, that in its own way, Curt had a part in this, but none of it was intentional. It was sad. And as Larry would talk, I mean, he had a photo album on the table that we were sitting at. And he was going through the photo album. You talk about young kid pictures and family pictures. And he was telling me some stories, here was Curt when he played softball, and he would talk about, so he enjoyed that time. And I felt, for the 4 or 5 hours that I was there, I almost felt like I was doing Larry a favor after I had left and got in the car and was, kind of reminiscing on the conversation, because I felt like Larry felt like he was able to talk about it. I don't know if I was the first person he ever did that with. I'm not claiming that, but I felt that and then him and I, our friendship, even after that, blossomed like you wouldn't believe. I talked to him regularly. And but I felt like he needed that time to reflect on Curt. Irene had brought some sandwiches into us and glasses of milk. And we just sat there, and our sandwiches and our milk we weren't even eating it. We were just busy with his photo album. And then Larry would get up and he said, come on over here. And we'd walk into the living room, and they had all the family pictures, but he inevitably would say, here was Curt in the 3rd grade or something, and it's like, my heart was just, I could tell
as a father. Yeah.
Yeah. And I could tell after I left, I really felt like Larry really needed to do that. And I hope he had done it with others. I don't know if it was just me, but that's my experience. It was a very emotional visit. And when I left, he walked me out to the car and he said, thanks a million for coming. He took me out to the dock in the backyard. We walked down to the lake where his place is. And he was showing me how him and Curt would bring the boat in. I mean, it was a long visit. And he said, thank you to me. He says, thank you. It was good having you here. So that was emotional for me.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mick, because then I got one more question I want to ask.
Besides the emotion of losing Curt and as a son, and wrestling fans took a hit.
Yeah.
Took a major hit when Curt, because again, he was 44 years old at the time. I believe he was working for Impact Wrestling or some such at the time. But Curt would only be in his 60s now. Certainly he would be a commentator. He would be a promoter. He would be a manager. He would have some connection.
He'd be on our show.
Yeah, absolutely. So in that sense, we all really lost a lot when Curt passed. And, from a friend standpoint, I will dearly miss the guy. So not enough accolades in the world.
Yeah. We talked about Curt as a wrestler, as a son, as a tag team partner, but I think we also need to remember or acknowledge, I guess, maybe the fact that he had kids of his own, and those kids lost their father at a very young age.
They did. And, again, as I said, tragedy for everybody all the way around. Curt was a larger-than-life presence. He was a great father, great family man. I'm in contact with Lenice, his wife, constantly on Facebook. And just the stories that she tells about how not only she, but the kids just idolized Curt Hennig. Mm-hmm. So, is there a lesson here? Who cares? It is what it is. I mean, what eventually happened, but the wrestling world for those years that we had Curt Hennig, we were the better for it, no question about it. I can hear the music in my head right now, the Mr. Perfect, which was actually, if you listen to the theme song from the movie Exodus, it's very, very close to that beginning overture. And if ever anybody deserved the nickname, it was Curt.
I thought one of the most emotional things, too, was the night that I saw Larry at ringside for one of Joe Hennig's matches on an independent card that I was at. And Amy, Curt's daughter, was also on the card that night. Larry was at ringside. He walked to the ring with Joe and sat in a ringside chair watching it. And after the match, Larry said to me, he said, I had to be here for Curt. I mean, he took that very seriously, and he was there, and he was a good grandpa. But I mean, he said, I had to be here for Curt. And he thought Larry, took up the torch. I mean, and I'm sure Lenice would say this as well. They were very close with Irene and Larry, and Larry felt that he had to carry the torch after Curt left, and he was very strong on Joe. Very proud of Joe with his WWF stuff. I think he exaggerated some of the stuff that they allegedly were going to do with Curtis Angle, but he was proud that they were taking care of him. And he said, Curt would have been happy with this. So he always thought he was doing something for Curt. And Curt was perfect.
Yeah, and of course we knew Joe was, Curtis Axel and Axelmania. By the way, he still was not eliminated in the Royal Rumble, just for the record. But let the record show that he still wasn't eliminated.
I'm gonna throw something in here too, because this will save you a step here at the end of the show, because Shire, in his wisdom, basically has given away 4/5 of the trivia answer, which was going to be about how many people in the Hennig family turned professional. Well, we gave you a bunch of them.
Hey, and this just in, let me tell you something, Chasmo.
There we go.
There you go.
Get on my case.
At any rate, so we'll skip the trivia question for this week, because the man doesn't listen, obviously. To
I never heard it. You never said it.
But
you're having another one of those busy spells.
It's there. Just go ahead and throw it out there. Throw it out. I mean, I put the graphic on there. So
it's Joe, of course, and Amy. Amy Hennig was a wrestler, and Curt, Larry, and Jesse Hennig. Jesse was Curt's brother, and he got into the business for the proverbial cup of coffee. And I'm sure that, so you had 5 or 6 Hennigs that were in the business. And Jesse Hennig, nice guy, but sadly, Jesse just was not.
So you're not going to do the trivia question, and everybody knows the answer. Yeah. So
congratulations to our winner,
Steve Mueller, a photo.
Oh, dear God, you don't quit.
Congratulations to our winner, George Shire. George is going to win an autographed picture of Mick. No, George is going to win an autographed picture of George.
If I get an autographed picture of him, I'm putting it up in the bathroom.
I don't know why this man ever gets a microphone, ever gets any screen time, ever gets anything in your Marty O'Neill sunglasses. Go back to bed.
Hey, if I could get this headset off, I'd come in and right now.
Oh, I love that.
Shout outs, right? We got shout outs?
Let's do some shout outs before we wrap it up. Mick, go ahead and go first.
I'm going to give a shout out to a friend for probably 50, 60 years. I've known him since he was a kid, Larry Kellner. And Larry is such a fan of professional wrestling. His dad was an usher at the old Minneapolis Auditorium, and through Larry and his dad, I was able to obtain all those great AWA sports facts from back in the day. Larry is such a loyal guy, loves wrestling, loves the old days. So, the shout out to Larry Kellner.
All right, what do you got, Georgie?
I like the name George, and I have a buddy named George Lentz. And absolutely, I've met George Lentz. He is a great historian. He was a great Crusher fan. He's done the Crusher's life results record. Phenomenal memory for Wisconsin wrestling and history. And I just wanted to give a shout out to him, thank him for his friendship and his devotion to keeping history alive. So George Lentz, I love you, man. Thanks for watching our show.
And mine's going to go to Phil Wazowski, at Phil Never Give Up on Twitter. Big follower of ours and a big fan of the show. So thank you, Phil, as well. Thank you guys for supporting us and supporting the program. And I know one thing, guys, I know that, we didn't talk about this, but it's kind of something that people are kind of wondering why we keep it less than an hour, because of certain streaming restrictions that we got on certain platforms. But this one I could tell was going to go long. So we were going to do one. This has actually been broken up into 2 parts. So as we're seeing it, this is dropping on April 26th. So the first episode was last week and this week. So just wanted to thank everybody for their support. And, we hear everything that you're saying. Do want to tell you as well, again, thanks to our sponsor, Soda Stick.
Yes.
One of our sponsors, really awesome. I'll put some information. Yep, Mick's got the Met Center hat right there, and I've got the Hormel Wiener Winner T-shirt and the Hormel Row of Fame right there from the Metrodome. If you're looking for any Minnesota sports themed merchandise, novelty T-shirts, hats, stickers, whatever, go to sodastickco.com. Use the promo code Unleash 15% off. I used it. Works like a charm. You can support us. You can support Soda Stick. If you're looking for AWA Unleashed merch, just say like a T-shirt or something. That's something that you guys would be interested. Let us know in the YouTube comments. Let us know in the Facebook comments. Hit me up on Twitter, a DM. Email George or Mick, DM Mick or George. Just let us know kind of if this is something that you'd be interested in, because we don't know what you guys are thinking unless you tell us. Want to thank as well one of our newer sponsors, Lift Bridge Brewery, the official beer of AWA Unleashed. I am drinking their Juice Z.
Give me that.
You can see right there. Come over to my place and come and get it. I mean, hey,
You didn't even share.
Popeye needs a spinach. Open up your mouth, George. There we go.
I'm going to come over this afternoon. I want a cold one.
Chris, just one thing, because if I don't mention her, she'll kick the shit out of me. The shirt that I'm wearing is Princess Victoria. My good friend Vicky Otis, one of the great lady wrestlers from the 1980s. I wanted to plug her. The shirt.
Yeah.
You wanted to plug her? Whoa.
Plug her merchandise.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Wow.
She raged. And I did want to mention the shirt that you got on, Chris. If ever a guy was a weenie winner, it's you.
Hey, good for lunch, good for dinner. I'm a Hormel wiener winner. Hormel Row of Fame. The old Metrodome. And by the way, you can see right there, check us out. The very first show. Thankful so much to Lift Bridge Brewery for allowing us to come out before the Midwest All-Star Wrestling Show. Want to thank David and Eli and everybody at Midwest All-Star Wrestling.
Absolutely.
They are letting us partner with them to have an opportunity to tell the stories to the people in person. We're going to be out there live before their show. Doors open up at noon. Live podcast at 2:00. Come and say hi. Wrestling starts at 3:30. We're going to have a blast. So we got a lot of things going on. I know it's a lot of plugging and it's a lot of promoting, but we're in a position where we can give back to you guys. And I want to give back to you guys that have supported us. So if you can make it out there, by all means, let us know. And, we'll give you the shout outs there. I mean, it's going to be Q&A. We're going to have some fun. We're going to give away some prizes, going to have some trivia. I know we may have a couple interviews or two lined up that are currently being bantered about. So you guys, thank you so much. And I mean, we got a lot of stuff going on. We're in a position, guys, and I say this, that not very many people get this opportunity and have the support that we do. And I feel like it's right for us to try and give back to those people and our sponsors, including Lift Bridge and Soda Sticks. So, I mean, would you agree that here's a chance for us to kind of pay it forward back in the very short period of time that we've been doing this?
No question about it. The fan loyalty is great. The sponsors have been tremendous. We love the interaction, not only on the internet, but to go out there and do it in person is just terrific. And I would advise all the Chris Tubbs groupies to probably get there early, because there's going to be a lot of you, and that could be a security issue.
We call them Resats brothers.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
The other thing, too, I want to put in a request that at the table, that whatever we're at, I want to be way over here, and I want Karch way over there. Maybe, Tubbs, you can be in the middle.
I've done that before. It doesn't work.
Monkey in the middle.
Had to get that word in there, didn't you?
I did. Hey, I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a blast on June 11th. Run, don't walk to get your tickets.